Well, happy Friday Eve. Welcome to Spicer & Company. I'm Sean Spicer.
I'm Lindsay Keith. Sean, you get me every time you say that. Every week you say it, and then you get me. Well, you got me again. Well, Sean, do you remember this, how the media completely dismissed or even ignored the bombshell reports about Joe Biden's son and his questionable overseas dealings before the election? Do you remember that?
Of course. Who could have missed it?
Yeah, well, the Democrats. Well, guess who changed their tune now?
All the same media folks who didn't cover it before.
That's exactly right. The federal investigators are looking into Hunter Biden's foreign ties, and now all of a sudden, their media is paying attention. We're going to talk a lot about that in just a little bit. But first, big news coming out today of the federal advisors. FDA worked with Pfizer, and they have approved to recommend the CDC to approve this COVID-19 vaccine. This is huge news coming out of the FDA. They'll likely authorize it on Sunday, that we'll probably see that.
Yeah, and some additional breaking news. Israel and Morocco have agreed to normalize relations. This is big, folks. This is the fourth Arab-Israeli agreement in 4 months. He's solving Middle East peace. This is something that wasn't said to be able to be done. They've mocked Jared Kushner. We're now talking about 4 countries reestablishing ties with Israel, and there's a potential to see more going. So another big foreign policy win for the president that I'm sure he's not going to get credit for. But Lindsay, let's get back to this Hunter Biden story. I mean, it is unbelievable. And I know we're going to bring in our first guest in a moment and talk about this. But the idea that the media is sort of like, oh, our bad.
Yeah, exactly. And they're saying, well, it wasn't big enough reporting then to pay attention to it. I'm sorry.
Vice president's son.
Yeah, just the vice president's son, just somebody being investigated. They said there wasn't enough reports of it. We're going to talk about that. There were enough reports. They just chose to ignore it. They were complicit in that completely.
Yeah, well, let's bring in our first guest, because I think he's going to have a lot to say with this. Judicial Watch president and author of a new book, A Republic Under Assault, Tom Fitton. Tom, welcome back to the show.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Tom, bear with me for a moment, because this is like therapy for me, but I need to go through this for a moment. This was the headline in Politico before the election. It said Hunter Biden's story is Russian disinformation, dozens of former intel officials say. Nothing to see here. Don't look at it. Well, guess what their headline is now? Look at this. Justice Department interest in Hunter Biden's covered more than taxes. Oh, apparently that's a big deal. But also, let's look at what NPR said. This is taxpayer-funded NPR. Why haven't you seen any stories from NPR about the NY Post Hunter Biden story? And they go on to explain why they're ignoring it. But now here's what our taxpayer-funded media outlet is saying. President-elect Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, says he was recently informed that he's under federal investigation. By the way, this is the New York Post headline on October 15th that they were showing that NPR is referring to. Remember this one? Censored. This was the Post. Not only were other media outlets not picking it up, but Facebook and Twitter both blocked it. It's unbelievable. And one more for you. Please bear with me, because I couldn't help myself. This was CNN. This is the esteemed Wolf Blitzer talking to Adam Schiff from California, who is the chairman of the Intel Committee. Take a listen.
Take a look at this picture of the president in the Oval Office holding up a copy of the New York Post, touting this conspiracy theory. It's made its way all the way to the commander-in-chief with a big smile on his face.
Yes. Well, look, I think we know who the driving force behind this smear has been all along, and it's been the president and the Kremlin. The Kremlin has an obvious interest in denigrating Joe Biden. They want Donald Trump to win.
Speaking of wanting people to win, in retrospect, it's pretty obvious the media had their thumb on the scale for Joe Biden.
Oh, that's a real charitable way of putting it.
It's all right, a foot.
This was a corrupt suppression of a news story to help a favored political candidate. And it's not just a Hunter Biden scandal and a Joe Biden scandal, and I guess a James Biden scandal, Vice President Biden's brother. It's an FBI scandal, a Justice Department scandal, because they covered this up prior to the election. It's a congressional scandal. Remember, Adam Schiff tried to remove President Trump from office for asking questions about Biden corruption that were well-founded. And now the media, we're supposed to believe the media's analysis of this scandal. I tell you what, the American people have been ill-served by the media that purports to represent them. You can't trust the media to tell you the truth about anything. For instance, I don't even know if we know the full truth about what's going on. We're relying on Hunter Biden's statement. I don't know. Maybe he's been indicted already. I don't know. But until the Justice Department and the FBI are held accountable, and until the media starts doing serious investigative journalism, there's not much we can trust, and we're in a rule of law crisis as a result.
Joe Biden in one of those debates said that my son Hunter has nothing to do with China, nothing. Which now clearly that's not the case, and the media is acting as if they had no idea that this was happening. But unfortunately, that's not the case. National Review wrote this story. Check this out: October 29th, before the election, FBI investigating Hunter Biden for money laundering. It was out there. They chose not to run with this. But when it came to the Russian dossier, Tom, and I was there getting the phone calls saying, hey, we've got this unverified dossier. What's your comment on it? They had no problem running with that. But when these Hunter Biden stories come out, they ignored them because they didn't want to believe them. They didn't want their guy to lose.
And, if Hunter Biden weren't the son of Joe Biden, we probably wouldn't have much interest in it. But on top of that, we have evidence that Hunter Biden's dealings benefited his father. So we've got this evidence out there, which the media still is covering up. They're pretending it's a tax issue about Hunter Biden. No, if they're doing their job, the Justice Department and the FBI, they're investigating Joe Biden. They can't separate the two. We've got the eyewitness testimony of Joe Biden's involvement. We have the documents, the emails from Hunter's laptop, and other emails separately from at least two other parties that confirm Joe Biden was involved in these issues. This is a RICO case, and it involves potentially the incoming president of the United States, assuming he's installed.
So, Tom, let me ask you a question. Joe Biden's been a public servant. He's been in public office since he was 29 years old. I think he was actually on one of the Delaware councils before that. But let's call it just 29 straight up. Since that time, for 47 years, he's been on the public dole, right, until Trump won in 2016, okay? And he's done pretty well financially for himself. His son, Hunter, who has done pretty well for himself despite no qualifications for any of the job that he's had. His brothers, as you've mentioned, have done pretty well trading off of his name. And yet, I dare say, I never heard anything about the brothers or any of the wealth accumulation that occurred by any of these folks during the election. Like, they keep talking about people getting vetted. They didn't. I don't believe that anyone. Look, did Judicial Watch? Does Judicial Watch look at this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, 6 months ago, we got documents from the Secret Service showing that Hunter Biden had been to China 5 times. Ignored by the media. What was he doing in China 5 times while his father was vice president? What was he doing?
Well, the funny thing is, Chuck Grassley, I want to play you what he had to say because it was interesting. I think he kind of took it personally. Let's take a listen.
For over a year, Senator Johnson and I investigated the Biden financial family dealings. We showed our work and we made our findings very public. But the liberal media and members of the other political party chose to dismiss our work. Those same liberal outlets that disparaged our investigation now report that Hunter Biden's financial deals in China raised counterintelligence concerns.
Tom, I don't have a lot of time left, but just real quick. I mean, what does it say? It used to be that congressional hearings would happen and people would report on them. Now it's sort of like, well, that's not true.
I mean, you had a Senate report, as Chuck Grassley intimated, that had strong evidence of criminal activity by the Biden family involving China, Moscow, and Ukraine. And it received zero coverage. And to the degree there was any coverage of this, it was American reporters suggesting if you ask questions about Biden corruption, you were a traitor.
Right.
You were a traitor because you were working with the Russians. They were just reusing the Russian smear to protect what looks to be a thoroughly corrupted politician, namely Joe Biden.
It almost looks like they used the cover of Russia to allow China to influence them. But I'd love to make sure when you guys, I know you're going to keep digging into this. I'd love to make sure you come back and give us a heads up because this isn't going anywhere. So thank you again for joining us, Tom.
You're welcome, Sean. We got a half a dozen lawsuits on the issue, so more will be coming, whether or not the DOJ or FBI do anything.
I love it. All right. Keep us informed.
You just watched Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news channel, now in more than 70 million homes. You can get Newsmax TV on your cable system or check your cable guide. And if your system doesn't carry Newsmax, call them, tell them you want Newsmax TV, because we're real news for real people.